Margaret Thompson stood in her pristine kitchen at 5:30 a.m., the same time she'd been waking up for the past 37 years. The coffee maker gurgled to life as she arranged fresh flowers in the crystal vase. White roses and baby's breath, Harold's favorites. Today marked their 42nd wedding anniversary, and like every year before, she had planned something special. The mahogany dining table gleamed under the chandelier, set with their finest china. The same china they'd received as wedding gifts 4 decades ago, carefully preserved and used only for the most meaningful occasions. Margaret had spent hours preparing Harold's favorite meal, prime rib with Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables from her garden, and his mother's apple pie recipe that she'd perfected over the years. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. At 68, Margaret moved with the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for others. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup subtle but elegant. She wore the navy blue dress Harold had complimented her on last Christmas, one of the few times he'd noticed what she was wearing in recent years. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times as she heard Harold's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his business suit despite being retired for 3 years. Some habits die hard. "Morning, Margaret. Coffee ready?" She poured his cup into the ceramic mug decorated with "World's Best Grandpa," a gift from their youngest granddaughter, Emma, 5 years ago. "Happy anniversary, Harold." He paused mid-sip, his brow furrowing slightly. "Anniversary? Oh, right. Yes, of course." His response was automatic, distracted. "Listen, I'm meeting the boys at the golf course this morning. Jim's celebrating his hole-in-one from yesterday." Margaret's smile faltered imperceptibly. "But Harold, I've prepared." "Can't it wait? The guys are expecting me." He was already heading toward the garage door, checking his phone. "Besides, Jessica called last night. She needs another payment for her medical school books. Something about a specialized textbook that costs $800. Their eldest granddaughter, Jessica, 24, and in her 3rd year of medical school at Northwestern. Margaret had been paying her tuition, room and board, and all expenses since day one. $43,000 per year, not including the extras that seemed to pop up monthly. "Of course," Margaret said softly. "I'll transfer it this afternoon." Harold was already in the garage, the automatic door rumbling open. His BMW pulled out of the driveway without so much as a wave goodbye. Margaret stood alone in her perfectly arranged kitchen, the anniversary dinner ingredients waiting in the refrigerator, the table set for 2. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Maybe one of the kids would remember. Maybe they'd call. The house felt enormous around her, every room echoing with memories of a life fully lived for others. This wasn't the first forgotten anniversary, but somehow it stung more acutely this year. Maybe because last year she'd convinced herself Harold had simply been preoccupied with his retirement adjustment. Or the year before, when he'd been dealing with his mother's estate. But 5 years? 5 consecutive years of forgotten anniversaries couldn't be explained away by circumstances. Margaret had met Harold Thompson in 1981 at Chicago University, where she was pursuing her master's degree in finance. She'd been brilliant with numbers, had job offers from 3 major investment firms, and a professor who'd called her the most naturally gifted financial analyst he'd seen in 20 years of teaching. Her thesis on emerging market investments had been published in the Journal of Financial Economics, and at 26, she was being courted by Wall Street powerhouses. Then she met Harold at a faculty mixer. He was charming, ambitious, working toward his MBA while managing his family's small construction company. Their courtship was whirlwind. Dinners at little Italian restaurants, long walks along Lake Michigan, discussions about building a life together. When he proposed after 8 months, Margaret said yes without hesitation. The job offers from New York had been tempting. Goldman Sachs had dangled a 6-figure starting salary, unheard of for a woman in 1982. But Harold's business was in Chicago, his family was there, and he'd looked at her with such hope when he'd asked if she'd consider staying. "We could build something amazing together, Maggie. I've got plans for the construction company. We could expand, maybe get into real estate development. I could use someone with your financial expertise." Quote, she'd turned down Goldman Sachs, turned down Merrill Lynch, turned down the career that could have made her a pioneer in her field. Instead, she'd thrown herself into supporting Harold's dreams, managing the books for Thompson Construction, analyzing potential development deals, and watching him grow the small company into a regional powerhouse. By 1985, they had their first child, Robert. Margaret had adapted seamlessly to motherhood while still handling the company's finances from home. 2 years later came Patricia, and then in 1992, their surprise baby, Michael. 3 children, a thriving business, and a husband whose success grew year by year. Much of it built on Margaret's financial acumen, though Harold rarely acknowledged her contributions publicly. "My wife keeps me organized," he'd say at business dinners, as if she were merely a very efficient secretary rather than the financial strategist who'd guided every major business decision for 2 decades. Margaret had never resented it, not really. She'd found fulfillment in her family, pride in Harold's success, joy in raising their children. When the kids were young, she'd been the room mother, the scout leader, the one who knew every teacher's name and never missed a school play or soccer game. Harold worked long hours building the business, so Margaret became the family's anchor, the constant presence that made everything else possible. The construction company had made them wealthy beyond their early dreams. By the time Harold sold it in 2020, they were worth over $4 million. The house in Winnetka was paid off, their retirement accounts were robust, and they had enough to ensure their children and grandchildren would never want for anything. Which was exactly what had happened. Their 3 adult children had learned to see Margaret as an endless source of support, financial, emotional, and practical. Robert, now 38, worked in sales but never seemed to earn quite enough to cover his lifestyle. His calls to Margaret usually began with casual conversation before transitioning to requests for help with mortgage payments, car repairs, or his daughter's private school tuition. Patricia, 36, had gone through an expensive divorce 2 years ago. Margaret had quietly paid for her legal fees, helped with the down payment on her new condo, and now covered health insurance for Patricia and her son Marcus. "Just until I get back on my feet, Mom," Patricia always said, though her definition of back on her feet seemed to evolve continuously. Michael, 31, was the artist of the family. He lived in Portland, creating beautiful but unmarketable sculptures, while Margaret covered his rent, utilities, and art supplies. "I'm so close to a breakthrough, Mom." The gallery owner said my next piece could really put me on the map. Margaret had been hearing variations of this for 8 years. Then there were the grandchildren. Jessica, Patricia's daughter, had always been academic, but medical school was expensive, even with Margaret's support. Marcus, Patricia's son, was starting his sophomore year at UCLA, studying film. Emma and Sophia, Robert's twins, were high school seniors already talking about college applications to expensive East Coast schools. 5 grandchildren, all brilliant, all with dreams that required funding. Margaret had calculated the numbers countless times. Between current expenses and projected college costs, she was looking at nearly $2 million over the next decade. Money she had, money she was happy to spend, but money that came with an expectation that she'd always be there, always available, always willing to sacrifice her own needs for theirs. The phone stayed silent all morning. Margaret cleaned the kitchen, rearranged the flowers, and checked her phone every few minutes. Maybe Harold would remember when he came home from golf. Maybe one of the kids would call. By noon, she'd received 3 text messages. Robert asked if she could cover Emma's SAT prep course fees. Michael wondered if she could send money for new art supplies. Patricia needing help with Marcus's textbook costs. Not one mention of the anniversary. Margaret made herself a sandwich and ate it alone at the kitchen counter, staring at the dining room table still set for 2. She thought about the early years of their marriage, when Harold would bring her flowers every Friday, when he'd surprise her with weekend getaways to Wisconsin, when they'd talk for hours about their dreams and plans. When did those conversations stop? When had Harold stopped seeing her as a partner and started treating her as household management? When had the children stopped calling just to chat and started calling only when they needed something? The answer, she realized, was gradual. So gradual, she hadn't noticed it happening until it was complete. Success had changed Harold. He'd grown comfortable, perhaps complacent. The children's needs had grown more expensive and more frequent. Everyone had settled into their roles. Harold as the successful retiree, the children as perpetual recipients of help, and Margaret as the enabler who made it all possible. Her phone buzzed with another text. Jessica, hi Grandma, emergency. I need $1,200 for a medical simulation lab fee. They're threatening to drop me from the program if I don't pay by tomorrow. Can you transfer it to my account? You're the best. Love you. Margaret stared at the message for a long moment. Jessica was studying to become a surgeon, a noble goal that Margaret fully supported. But there was something about the casual assumption that Margaret would immediately solve any financial problem, combined with the complete silence about the anniversary, that felt like a small knife turning in her chest. She transferred the money. She always transferred the money. At 4 o'clock, Harold returned from golf, sunburned and cheerful. Great day on the course, Margaret. Shot an 82, my best game this month. That's wonderful, Harold. Dinner is ready whenever you are. Actually, I'm meeting some clients for drinks at the club. Potential investors in Jim's new development project. Could be big for all of us. He was already loosening his tie, heading upstairs to shower and change. But Harold, it's our anniversary. He paused on the staircase, looking genuinely confused. Right, yes. Can we celebrate this weekend instead? This meeting could be worth millions. Margaret nodded, as she always did. Of course. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Harold showered, changed into his best suit, and left for his meeting. Margaret sat alone at the dining room table, surrounded by their finest china, eating prime rib by herself. The grandfather clock marked each passing hour with mechanical precision. At 9 p.m., her phone rang. Harold's voice was slurred with expensive whiskey. Margaret, don't wait up. The meeting went late, and now we're at Morton's Steakhouse. Big celebration. I'll probably crash at Jim's place tonight. Don't want to drive. Harold, please come home. We need to talk. Tomorrow, Margaret. We'll talk tomorrow. Love you. The line went dead. Margaret sat in the silence of her empty house, surrounded by the remnants of an anniversary dinner meant for two, wearing a dress chosen to please a husband who hadn't even noticed she was wearing it. She began clearing the table, carefully washing each piece of china by hand as she'd done for 42 years. The routine was meditative, familiar, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, for the first time in decades, Margaret found herself questioning everything. What had happened to the brilliant young woman who'd turned down Wall Street for love? What had happened to the partnership she'd thought she was building with Harold? When had she become invisible in her own life? As she dried the last wine glass, wine that had gone undrunk, Margaret caught her reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back at her was still elegant, still strong, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A flicker of something that might have been anger, or perhaps awakening. Tomorrow she would call the children, wish them well, and continue being the grandmother who solved every problem with a bank transfer. Tomorrow, Harold would probably bring her flowers as an afterthought apology, and she would graciously accept them as she always did. But tonight, standing alone in her perfect kitchen in her perfect house, Margaret Thompson began to wonder what might happen if she stopped being quite so perfect. What might happen if the woman who had sacrificed everything for her family's dreams finally remembered she had dreams too? The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking the end of another forgotten anniversary. But perhaps, Margaret thought as she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, it was also marking the beginning of something else entirely. Margaret woke the next morning to an empty bed and the sound of Harold's car already gone from the garage. A note on the kitchen counter read, quote, "Early tea time. Back this afternoon, H." No mention of the previous night, no acknowledgement of the forgotten anniversary, no flowers as an apology. She made coffee for one and sat at the breakfast nook, looking out at her meticulously maintained garden. The roses were blooming beautifully this June, their perfection a stark contrast to how she felt inside. Her phone displayed 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails from various family members, but none from Harold. The first voicemail was from Robert, her eldest son. Mom, hey, it's me. Listen, Emma got accepted into that summer pre-med program at Johns Hopkins. It's $15,000 for 6 weeks, but it could really help her college applications. Can you call me back? Love you. Margaret deleted the message and moved to the next one. Patricia's voice filled the kitchen. Mom, Marcus needs a new laptop for his film editing class. His professor says the one he has won't run the software properly. I found one for $3,000, but with everything going on, could you help us out? You know I'll pay you back when the divorce settlement comes through. The divorce settlement Patricia had been expecting for 18 months. The divorce settlement that would solve all her problems, according to Patricia, though Margaret had read enough legal documents to know Patricia's expectations were unrealistic. Message after message, each one a request, each one delivered with the casual assumption that Margaret would say yes. Jessica needed money for medical conference attendance. Michael's art studio was raising the rent. Robert's mortgage payment had increased due to property tax reassessment. Not one person mentioned the anniversary. Margaret set the phone aside and walked through her house, really looking at it for the first time in years. Every room told the story of a woman who had dedicated her life to others. The living room walls displayed dozens of family photos, but Margaret appeared in only a handful of them. She was always the one taking the pictures. The bookshelf held Harold's business awards, the children's school achievements, and photo albums documenting every milestone in their lives. Her own master's degree in finance was tucked away in a closet upstairs, along with copies of her published research and letters of recommendation from professors who had believed she was destined for greatness. When was the last time anyone had asked about her interests, her thoughts on anything beyond family logistics? The Home Office revealed the full scope of her invisible labor. Filing cabinets contained decades of meticulously maintained financial records for the family. Harold's taxes, perfectly organized. College fund statements for all 5 grandchildren, tracked to the penny. Investment portfolios she managed but Harold took credit for. Insurance policies she researched and purchased. Property maintenance schedules she created and supervised. Margaret had essentially been running a family corporation for 40 years, handling millions of dollars in assets and transactions. Yet Harold introduced her at social events as, quote, my wife, Margaret, who keeps our home running smoothly. Her computer showed the recent financial transfers, $800 to Jessica last week, $1,200 yesterday, $3,000 to Patricia the week before. In the past month alone, she had transferred over $18,000 to various family members. Her spreadsheet tracking family expenses showed even more troubling numbers. In the past year, she had given or loaned nearly $200,000 to their children and grandchildren. $200,000 that was never discussed as an investment in the family's future, never acknowledged as the significant financial support it represented, never even properly thanked for beyond casual "you're the best" text messages. Margaret's bank statements revealed another pattern she hadn't fully recognized. While she was transferring thousands to family members each month, her own discretionary spending had steadily decreased. She bought her clothes at department store sales, chose generic brands at the grocery store, and hadn't taken a personal vacation in over a decade. Meanwhile, Harold golfed at the country club 3 times a week, drove a new BMW, and treated clients to expensive dinners that he justified as business expenses. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had once been courted by Wall Street's most prestigious firms was now clipping coupons while funding everyone else's dreams. Her phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen. Mom, did you get my message about Marcus's laptop? Good morning, Patricia. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. Listen, about the laptop. Patricia, do you know what yesterday was? A pause. Tuesday? It was my wedding anniversary. Your father's and mine. 42 years. Another pause, longer this time. Oh, gosh, Mom, I'm so sorry. With everything going on with the divorce and Marcus's school, I completely forgot. Did you and Dad do something special? We had planned to. Well, you should celebrate this weekend instead. Maybe go to that little restaurant you like. Anyway, about Marcus's laptop. Margaret closed her eyes. Even when confronted with her forgotten anniversary, Patricia had managed to pivot back to her needs within 30 seconds. I'll look into the laptop, Patricia. Thanks, Mom. You're amazing. I don't know what we'd do without you. Margaret ended the call and immediately received a text from Emma, one of Robert's twins. Grandma! Bad news about summer camp. They want full payment by Friday or they'll give my spot away. Dad says you're handling it? Can you wire the money today? XOXO. Summer camp. Margaret scrolled through her emails and found the registration information she'd apparently agreed to handle. $4,000 for a theater camp in California. When had she agreed to this? She searched her memory and vaguely recalled Robert mentioning it during a phone call where she'd been distracted by preparing dinner for Harold's business associates. Just sign whatever needs signing, Mom. You know Emma's dreams of Broadway. Margaret had signed the paperwork and apparently committed to the payment without realizing it. She realized, operating on autopilot when it came to family financial requests. Yes had become her default response to everything. She transferred the money for Emma's camp, then sat staring at her computer screen. In the past 24 hours, she had been asked for nearly $8,000 in various payments, and no one had wished her a happy anniversary. The pattern extended beyond just money. Margaret scrolled through her calendar and saw the evidence of how thoroughly her own needs had been erased. Doctor appointments scheduled around Harold's golf games. Hair appointments were canceled when grandchildren needed babysitting. Her book club meetings were missed because someone always needed something urgent. Last month, she had been looking forward to attending a financial planning seminar downtown. She'd always maintained her interest in investment strategy, even if no one knew about it. But Marcus had needed a ride to a college interview the same day, and Patricia couldn't take time off work. Margaret had canceled her plans and spent 4 hours driving to Northwestern University, waiting, and driving back. Marcus had texted her afterward. Thanks for the ride, Grandma. The interview went great. No acknowledgement of what she had given up to help him. Margaret walked to her bedroom and opened her jewelry box. Inside was the tennis bracelet Harold had given her for their 20th anniversary, before he'd stopped putting effort into gift-giving. Beside it was a small jewelry pouch containing earrings her mother had given her, the only inheritance she'd kept when they'd settled her parents' estate. Everything else had been sold or donated, with the proceeds going into the grandchildren's college funds. When had she stopped mattering as an individual? When did she become simply a function, the person who paid for things, who solved problems, who was always available but never prioritized? Her phone rang again. Harold's name on the screen. Margaret, I need you to transfer money to the club. They're upgrading the golf course and want payment for my share of the assessment. $15,000. Harold, we need to talk. About what? Listen, I'm at the clubhouse. Can we discuss whatever it is later? Jim's waiting for me in the pro shop. It's about yesterday. About our anniversary. Right, yes, I'm sorry about that. Things got complicated. We'll celebrate this weekend, okay? Maybe dinner at Romano's. Romano's. The same restaurant they'd been going to for 20 years, where Harold would order the same steak and talk about golf while Margaret listened politely. Not exactly the romantic gesture she'd been hoping for. Harold, this was the 5th year you've forgotten our anniversary. That's not true. Last year we went to Romano's. That was for your birthday, Harold. We went to Romano's for your birthday. A pause. Are you sure? Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. He wasn't even pretending to remember. He genuinely couldn't distinguish between their anniversary and his own birthday because neither held any significance for him anymore. I'm sure, Harold. Well, we'll make it up this year. Make reservations for Saturday night. Now about that golf course assessment. Margaret transferred the $15,000 to the country club. Harold thanked her absently and hung up to rejoin his friends. She sat in her empty house, surrounded by the evidence of a life spent in service to people who barely noticed her existence. The mailbox held more requests disguised as conversation. A letter from Jessica describing her medical school experiences in great detail before mentioning she needed money for a stethoscope and medical bag. A postcard from Michael in Portland showing his latest sculpture, with a note on the back asking if she could cover his studio rent for 3 months while he prepared for a gallery showing. Each request was reasonable in isolation. Jessica needed medical equipment for her education. Michael was pursuing his artistic dreams. The grandchildren deserved opportunities. Harold's golf was his primary social outlet in retirement. But collectively, they represented something more troubling. A family that had learned to see Margaret as an unlimited resource rather than a person with her own needs, desires, and feelings. Margaret made herself lunch and ate it alone, as she had eaten most meals alone for the past several years. Harold was always at the club, or meeting with clients, or watching sports with friends. The children called when they needed something, but rarely visited just to spend time together. Even family gatherings had become orchestrated events where Margaret did most of the planning and preparation, while others enjoyed the results. Last Christmas, she spent 3 days cooking for 22 people. She'd bought all the presents, wrapped them, decorated the entire house, and hosted the dinner. During the meal, Harold had raised his glass for a toast to another wonderful Christmas, thanks to Margaret's hard work. Hard work. As if she were the hired help, rather than the woman who had made Christmas magical for 4 decades. After dinner, while Margaret cleaned dishes, the family had gathered in the living room to open presents. She could hear their laughter and conversations from the kitchen, but no one had offered to help with cleanup. When she finally joined them, most of the gift opening was over, and the conversation had moved on to other topics. She had spent weeks choosing perfect gifts for everyone, but her own presents had been clearly last-minute purchases. A generic scarf from Robert, a candle from Patricia, a coffee mug from Harold with "World's Best Wife" printed on it in fading letters, obviously grabbed from a gas station on his way home. The grandchildren had been more thoughtful, but their gifts revealed how little they truly knew her. Art supplies from Emma, though Margaret had never shown any interest in drawing. A cookbook from Marcus, though she'd been cooking for Harold's preferences so long she'd forgotten her own favorite foods. A generic gift card from Jessica with no personal note. Margaret realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had given her a gift that showed they actually knew her as a person. Harold certainly didn't know her favorite color anymore, or what book she liked to read, or what she dreamed about when she wasn't managing everyone else's lives. The afternoon brought more of the same. Sophia, Robert's other daughter, called asking if Margaret could pay for her SAT tutoring. Robert himself called to discuss Emma's college application strategy and whether Margaret thought they should hire a consultant to help with essay writing. Another $5,000 expense that was presented as a question but was really a request for funding. "You know how important this is, Mom. Emma's our little actress. She's got real talent. This could determine her entire future." Margaret had heard variations of this speech from all her children over the years. Every expense was framed as crucial to someone's future success. Every request was presented as an investment in family dreams. But somehow, Margaret's own dreams had never warranted similar investment or consideration. By evening, Harold still hadn't returned home. Margaret heated leftover anniversary dinner in the microwave and ate it while watching the news. The house felt like a museum of her own life, perfectly maintained, beautifully decorated, and utterly lonely. She thought about the woman she had been at 26, the woman who had published financial research and commanded attention in boardrooms full of men twice her age. That woman had been confident, ambitious, and intellectually curious. That woman had believed she could change the world. Where had that woman gone? When had Margaret become someone who existed primarily to serve others' needs? The answer, she realized, was that the erosion had been so gradual she hadn't noticed it happening. Each small sacrifice had seemed reasonable at the time. Each compromise had been framed as temporary. Each time she'd put others' needs first, it felt like love. But love, Margaret was beginning to understand, shouldn't require the complete erasure of oneself. Love shouldn't mean becoming invisible in your own life. As she prepared for bed in her empty house, Margaret made a decision that surprised her. Tomorrow she will start paying attention. She would start noticing exactly how she was being treated, exactly what was expected of her, and exactly how little was given in return. For 42 years, she had been the perfect wife, mother, and grandmother. Perhaps it was time to discover what Margaret Thompson might be capable of if she stopped being quite so perfect. 3 weeks after the forgotten anniversary, Margaret received an envelope that would change everything. The return address read Northwestern University Financial Aid Office, and inside was a letter addressed to her personally, not to Harold, not to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, but specifically to Margaret Thompson. "Dear Mrs. Thompson," the letter began, We are writing to inform you that due to your granddaughter Jessica's exceptional academic performance and research contributions, she has been selected as one of 10 students nationwide to receive the Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell Full Scholarship for the remainder of her medical education. This prestigious award covers all tuition, fees, and living expenses for the final 2 years of medical school, valued at approximately $180,000. Margaret read the letter 3 times before the implications sank in. Jessica had been awarded a full scholarship and had never mentioned it. More troubling, the letter was dated 2 weeks ago, which meant Jessica had known about this windfall for 14 days, while continuing to request money from Margaret for various school expenses. Just yesterday, Jessica had called asking for $2,000 for essential medical equipment that couldn't wait for next month's allowance. Margaret had transferred the money immediately, as she always did. Margaret's hands shook slightly as she reached for her phone. Jessica answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, Grandma. Perfect timing. I was just thinking about you." "Jessica, I received an interesting letter today from Northwestern." A pause. "Oh, that?" "Yes, that. A full scholarship, Jessica. For the past 2 weeks, while you've been asking me for money, you've had a full scholarship." "Grandma, I can explain." "I'm listening." "Well, the scholarship doesn't start until next semester, and there are still expenses this semester, plus I wasn't sure if I should accept it. There are some strings attached, like research commitments that might interfere with my clinical rotations." Margaret felt a cold fury building in her chest. "Strings attached?" "Jessica, this is the Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell Scholarship. I looked it up. It's the most prestigious medical scholarship in the country. Students compete for years to even be considered." Quote, "I know, but you thought it was easier to keep taking money from your grandmother than to accept a scholarship that recognizes your achievements?" "It's not like that, Grandma. I didn't want to commit to anything without thinking it through. And in the meantime, you saw no problem with taking $2,000 from me yesterday for essential equipment?" Jessica's voice grew smaller. "I really do need the equipment?" "The scholarship covers all educational expenses, Jessica, all of them." A long silence. When Jessica spoke again, her tone had shifted to the one she used when she was in trouble. Sweet, apologetic, slightly wounded. "Grandma, you're making this sound worse than it is. I love you, and I appreciate everything you do for our family. Money isn't the most important thing between us, is it?" Margaret felt something snap inside her. The casual manipulation, the practiced deflection, the assumption that she would accept being taken advantage of because money isn't the most important thing. It was exactly the response she'd been trained to accept for decades. "You're right, Jessica. Money isn't the most important thing. Honesty is, respect is, and right now I'm not feeling much of either from you." "Grandma, please don't be upset. I'll pay you back the $2,000. "With what money, Jessica? You just told me you haven't decided whether to accept a full scholarship." Margaret ended the call before Jessica could respond. Her phone immediately began buzzing with text messages, apologies, explanations, promises to make it right. Margaret turned the phone face down and sat in her kitchen, staring at the scholarship letter. This wasn't just about money. This was about the fundamental dishonesty that had crept into her relationships with everyone in her family. They had learned that Margaret could be counted on for financial support without question, without accountability, and without honesty about their actual circumstances. Margaret walked to her home office and opened her laptop. If Jessica had been awarded a prestigious scholarship 2 weeks ago, what else might the family be hiding from her? She began to research. Robert's LinkedIn profile showed he'd received a significant promotion 6 months ago, senior sales director at a medical device company, with a salary range that should have eliminated his need for Margaret's monthly supplements to his mortgage payments. Yet he'd called just last week asking for help with property taxes. Patricia's Instagram account, which Margaret rarely checked, told a different story than the struggling divorcee narrative Margaret had been supporting. Photos from the past month showed expensive dinners, a new designer handbag, and a weekend trip to Napa Valley with friends. The captions talked about treating myself and finally living my best life. This from the woman who claimed she couldn't afford her son's textbooks without Margaret's help. Michael's art studio website had a testimonials page filled with glowing reviews and sold pieces listed at impressive prices. One sculpture had sold for $15,000 just 3 weeks ago. Yet Michael had called Margaret yesterday asking for help with his rent because he was so close to making it, but needed just a little more support. Margaret spent 2 hours discovering that her family had been systematically lying to her about their financial situations while continuing to request and receive money from her. They weren't struggling students and divorced mothers and starving artists. They were successful adults who had learned that playing the victim got them access to Margaret's bank account. The laptop screen blurred as tears of anger and humiliation filled her eyes. 42 years of marriage, and her husband treated her like a business manager. 3 adult children, and they treated her like a personal ATM. 5 grandchildren, and they treated her like a resource to be exploited. Margaret's phone rang. Harold's name appeared on the screen. "Margaret, I need you to call the insurance company. There's been some confusion about the policy on the boat." "What boat, Harold?" "The boat I'm buying with Jim and the guys. I mentioned it last week." Margaret searched her memory. Harold had mentioned many things last week while she was preparing dinner for his poker night, answering emails from grandchildren, and coordinating Patricia's son's dental appointment. A boat had been mentioned, but Harold had made it sound like a casual conversation among friends. "Harold, you're buying a boat?" "It's an investment. A fishing charter business. We'll rent it out when we're not using it." "How much does this boat cost?" "That's not important. What's important is getting the insurance sorted out. The broker needs proof of coverage before we can finalize the deal." "Harold, how much?" A pause. $80,000. "But like I said, it's an investment." Margaret felt the room spinning slightly. $80,000? Harold, you spend $80,000 without discussing it with me? "Margaret, it's my money. I built the business. I earned it." "Your money?" "Harold, I've been managing our finances for 40 years. I've been the one making the investments, tracking the portfolios, maximizing our returns. That money exists because of both of us." "You're being dramatic. It's just a boat." "Just a boat." "Harold, yesterday I gave Jessica $2,000 because she said she needed medical equipment. Last week I gave Robert $3,000 for property taxes. I've given Patricia over $20,000 this year for various emergencies, but you can spend $80,000 on a boat without even telling me? That's different. That's family." "I'm your family, Harold. I'm your wife. Doesn't your wife deserve to be consulted before you make major financial decisions?" "You're overreacting. Look, just call the insurance company. I'm meeting Jim at the marina in an hour." Harold hung up before Margaret could respond. She sat holding the phone, realizing that her husband had just spent more money on a recreational boat than she had spent on herself in the past 5 years combined. Margaret walked through her house, seeing it with new eyes. Every improvement, every piece of furniture, every decorative choice had been made with Harold's preferences in mind. The leather furniture he preferred, though she found it uncomfortable. The dark wood paneling in his study made the room feel oppressive. The oversized television that dominated the living room, positioned for optimal viewing from Harold's recliner. Where were her preferences reflected? Where was the evidence that a woman lived in this house, had opinions about this house, had contributed to this house? She found herself in the guest bedroom that had once been her craft room, before Harold had decided they needed space for overnight visitors. Margaret's sewing machine was stored in the closet, covered with dust. Her books on financial theory had been moved to the basement to make room for Harold's golf magazines. Even her private space had been absorbed into the needs of others. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, Patricia's college-age son. "Grandma, I got accepted into a study abroad program in Italy. It's only $25,000 for the semester, and Mom says you're the best person to talk to about making it happen. Can we set up a call this week? Love you." $25,000. Mentioned casually as if it were $25, with the assumption that Margaret would, of course, make it happen. Margaret typed back, "Congratulations on the acceptance. That's quite an expensive program." Marcus responded immediately, "Worth every penny, though. Mom says you understand how important education is. When can we talk?" Margaret stared at the message. When had she become the family member everyone turned to for large sums of money? When had her role been reduced to the person who pays for things. She thought about her marriage, about the early years when she and Harold had made decisions together. Major purchases had required discussion, compromise, mutual agreement. Harold had valued her financial expertise, had relied on her analysis of investment opportunities, and had introduced her as his partner in business decisions. Now he bought boats without consulting her and expected her to handle the paperwork. She thought about her children's childhoods, when they had needed her for emotional support, guidance, and love. They had called to share good news, to seek advice about relationships and career decisions, to include her in their lives beyond her ability to solve their problems. Now they called only when they needed money. She thought about her grandchildren, whom she adored and had wanted to support through college and beyond. But when did that support become an expectation rather than a gift? When had they stopped seeing her as a grandmother who loved them and started seeing her as a trust fund with a heartbeat? Margaret made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She opened her laptop and began to type. The first email went to her financial advisor. Please schedule a meeting with me for next week. I need to discuss restructuring some accounts and establishing new parameters for family financial support. The second email went to Harold. I've made reservations at Romano's for Saturday night. We need to have a serious conversation about our marriage, our finances, and our future. The third email was harder to write. It went to all three of her children. I hope you're all doing well. I've been thinking about our family dynamics lately and would like to schedule individual conversations with each of you. This isn't about money or requests for help. This is about our relationships and my role in your lives. Please let me know when you're available for a phone call this week. The fourth email went to her grandchildren. I love you all and am proud of your achievements and ambitions. However, I've realized that our conversations have become focused primarily on financial support rather than getting to know each other as people. I'd like to change that. Let's plan some time together soon where we can just talk and spend time together. Margaret sent all 4 emails before she could change her mind. Then she walked to her bedroom and began going through her closet. Buried behind Harold's expanding collection of golf shirts and casual wear, she found dresses she'd forgotten she owned. Bright colors that Harold had once said were too flashy. Styles that made her feel confident and attractive, which she'd stopped wearing when Harold stopped noticing what she wore. Tomorrow she will start making changes. But tonight, for the first time in years, Margaret Thompson was going to dress for herself, cook what she wanted to eat, and spend an evening doing something that brought her joy, rather than serving someone else's needs. She had forgotten what that felt like, but she was about to remember. Margaret's meeting with her financial advisor, Charles Brennan, revealed numbers that shocked even her. Over the past 5 years, she had transferred $847,000 to various family members. Nearly $1 million, documented in neat columns that Charles had prepared at her request. Margaret, I have to ask, are you aware that you've essentially been funding a small corporation's worth of expenses for your family? She stared at the spreadsheet on his mahogany desk. College tuitions, emergency loans, mortgage supplements, car payments, medical expenses, travel costs, business investments for Harold, art supplies, study abroad programs, summer camps, and dozens of smaller transfers that had seemed insignificant at the time. I knew it was substantial, Charles, but I hadn't calculated the total. The concerning part isn't just the amount, Charles continued, adjusting his glasses. It's the acceleration. 2 years ago, you were transferring about $80,000 annually to family members. Last year, it jumped to $200,000. This year, you're on track for nearly $300,000. Margaret felt nauseated. They keep needing more. Or they've learned that you always say yes. Charles leaned forward. Margaret, at this rate, you'll have depleted your liquid assets within 4 years. Your retirement accounts are solid, but if you continue these transfers while Harold makes large purchases like this boat, you could find yourselves in serious financial trouble by the time you're 75. The irony was staggering. Margaret, who had once managed multi-million-dollar investment strategies, had allowed her own family to drive her toward financial instability through death by 1,000 cuts. I want to make some changes, Charles. I was hoping you'd say that. Margaret's phone had been buzzing constantly since she'd sent her emails the previous evening. 17 missed calls from family members, all undoubtedly wanting to know why she was suddenly asking for conversations instead of simply transferring money as requested. She drove home with Charles's analysis in her briefcase and a new sense of determination. Harold's BMW was in the driveway, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. As she entered through the garage, she could hear his voice from the kitchen, animated and frustrated. Completely unreasonable. After 42 years of marriage, she's suddenly questioning every decision I make. Jim thinks she might be having some kind of midlife crisis. Margaret paused in the mudroom, listening to her husband discuss her mental state with their neighbor. And now she's demanding we have dinner Saturday night to discuss our relationship as if we're teenagers. I don't understand what's gotten into her, but something needs to be done before she embarrasses us both. Margaret walked into the kitchen. Harold was pacing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. Jim, I'll call you back. Harold, were you just discussing our private marriage issues with the neighbors? I was talking to a friend about your recent behavior, yes. My behavior? Margaret, you've been acting strangely. The emails to the kids, demanding family meetings, questioning my boat purchase. People are starting to notice. Margaret set her purse on the counter with deliberate calm. People are starting to notice that I'm finally standing up for myself? You're making us look bad. The kids are confused and upset. Jessica called me crying, saying you accused her of lying. Robert thinks you're having financial problems, and that's why you're suddenly questioning family expenses. What did you tell them? Quote, I told them their grandmother was going through a difficult adjustment period, and that we'd work through it as a family. Margaret felt something cold settle in her stomach. You told them I was having problems? Harold, did it occur to you to ask me what was actually wrong before diagnosing me to our children? What's wrong is obvious. You're obsessing over money, creating drama where none existed, and frankly, you're acting like someone I don't recognize. Good. Harold blinked. What? I said good. Maybe it's time you got to know the real Margaret Thompson, instead of the woman who's been quietly managing your life for 4 decades. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out Charles's financial analysis. She spread the papers across the kitchen island. Harold, look at these numbers. Margaret, I don't have time for... Make time. Her voice carried an authority that made Harold stop and actually look at her. These are our family financial transfers for the past 5 years. $847,000. Harold glanced at the papers dismissively. So, we can afford it. Can we? Charles ran projections. At current spending rates, including your boat purchase and other recent investments, we'll be in financial trouble within 4 years. Charles is being overly conservative. Harold, I have a master's degree in finance. I published research on investment strategies. I built half of our wealth through careful portfolio management. When I tell you we have a problem, we have a problem. Harold's expression shifted slightly. It had been years since Margaret had referenced her professional expertise. Years since she'd challenged him on financial matters with the confidence of someone who actually knew what she was talking about. Even if the numbers are concerning, Harold said carefully, we can adjust, reduce some of the family support. The family support they're receiving is based on lies. Margaret pulled out the printed screenshots she'd gathered over the weekend. Jessica's scholarship letter. Robert's LinkedIn promotion announcement. Patricia's social media posts showing expensive purchases. Michael's art sales records. Jessica has a full scholarship she didn't tell us about. Robert got a promotion that should have eliminated his need for our mortgage help. Patricia is spending money on luxury items while claiming she can't afford textbooks. Michael sold a sculpture for $15,000 3 weeks before asking us for rent money. Quote, Harold studied the evidence, his face growing pale. They're all lying? Every single one of them. And they're doing it because they've learned that I, will give them money without asking questions, without requiring accountability, without even expecting honesty. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Margaret stared at her husband in disbelief. Harold, when was the last time you asked me about anything? When was the last time you showed interest in how I spend my days, who I talk to, what I'm thinking about? You bought a boat without consulting me, but you expect me to keep you informed about family financial management? Harold opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of accumulated resentments and misunderstandings. Margaret's phone rang, Patricia's name on the screen. "Answer it," Harold said. "Put it on speaker." Margaret accepted the call and set the phone on the counter. "Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. Listen, about that email you sent." "I'm here, Patricia. Your father's here, too." A pause. "Oh, hi, Dad." "Patricia," Harold said, his voice stern, "your mother has shown me some interesting information about your financial situation." "I don't know what you mean." Margaret opened Patricia's Instagram account on her phone and began reading. June 15th. Treating myself to dinner at Le Bernardin because life is short and I deserve nice things. June 18th. New Hermes bag because sometimes you just have to splurge. June 22nd. Weekend in Napa with the girls. Exactly what my soul needed. Silence on the phone. "Patricia," Margaret continued, "Le Bernardin is a $400 per person restaurant. Hermes bags start at $3,000. A weekend in Napa for a group costs thousands more. Yet last week you called me asking for money because you couldn't afford Marcus's textbooks." "Mom, those posts, they're not what they seem." "Really? Because I also have your credit card statements from the joint account I've been paying off. The charges match the posts exactly." Another silence, longer this time. "Patricia," Harold said, "have you been lying to your mother about your financial situation?" "I haven't been. It's complicated, Dad." "It's not complicated," Margaret said. "Either you can afford luxury dinners and designer bags, or you can't afford your son's textbooks. Which is it?" "Fine." Patricia's voice cracked. "Fine, I can afford the textbooks. I can afford most of what I've been asking for help with. But Mom, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The divorce was traumatic. I'm trying to rebuild my life, to feel good about myself again. When I call you for help, it's not just about money. It's about feeling supported by my family." Margaret felt her heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. "So you've been taking money from me because it makes you feel loved?" "When you help me, I know you care about me." "Patricia, I would care about you whether you needed money or not. But what you've been doing isn't asking for love. It's manipulating me for cash while lying about your circumstances." "Mom, please don't be like this. I need you." "You need my money, Patricia. There's a difference." Harold was staring at Margaret with an expression she'd never seen before, something between respect and alarm. "Patricia," he said, "your mother is right. This needs to stop." "Dad, you can't be serious. This is how our family works. Mom helps when we need it. That's what families do." "Families don't lie to each other," Margaret said. "Families don't manipulate each other. And families don't treat one member like an ATM machine." "I never..." "Patricia, in the past 2 years, I've given you over $40,000. Have you once asked me how I'm doing? Have you once invited me to do something together that doesn't involve me solving one of your problems? Have you once remembered my anniversary, my birthday, or any event that matters to me?" The silence stretched so long Margaret thought the call had disconnected. "I remember your birthday," Patricia finally said, her voice small. "When is it, Patricia?" Another pause. "It's in the fall." "It's March 15th, Patricia. My birthday is March 15th. It's been March 15th for 68 years. Harold's face had gone ashen. He was looking at Margaret as if seeing her for the first time. "Mom," Patricia whispered, "I'm sorry." "I know you are, honey. But being sorry isn't enough anymore. Things are going to change." "What do you mean?" Margaret looked at Harold, who nodded slightly. "It means the financial support stops until we can rebuild our relationships on honest foundations. It means you need to start seeing me as your mother who loves you, not as a resource to exploit. And it means you need to figure out how to manage your own finances like the capable adult you are. Mom, you can't be serious. What about Marcus's school expenses? What about them? You just admitted you can afford them. But what if something really happens? What if there's a real emergency? Then you'll call me and tell me the truth about it, and we'll discuss it like adults. But the days of automatic transfers for made-up crises are over." Patricia began crying. Mom, please, I can't do this without you. Yes, you can, Patricia. You're smart, you're capable, and you're stronger than you think. But you'll never know that as long as I keep enabling you to avoid taking responsibility for your own life. After Patricia hung up, Harold and Margaret sat in their kitchen in stunned silence. The grandfather clock ticked away minutes while they both processed what had just happened. I had no idea, Harold finally said. About Patricia? About any of it. About how they've been treating you, about how I've been treating you. Margaret looked at her husband, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He appeared older than she remembered, more fragile somehow. But there was something else in his expression, something that reminded her of the man she'd married decades ago. Harold, when was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about logistics? When did we stop being partners and start being... I don't even know what we are anymore. I don't know either, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Margaret's phone buzzed with another call. Robert's name appeared. Ready for round 2? She asked Harold. He nodded. Put him on speaker. Robert's voice filled the kitchen with forced cheerfulness. Mom, Dad, great to catch you both. Listen, I've been thinking about our family situation, and I want to clear the air about a few things. Margaret exchanged glances with Harold. Their eldest son was going on the offensive, trying to control the narrative before they could confront him with evidence. I know there might be some confusion about my recent promotion, Robert continued. The thing is, while the title change looks impressive on LinkedIn, the actual salary increase won't kick in for another 6 months. So all those mortgage payments you've been helping with are still necessary. Harold leaned toward the phone. Robert, your mother has documentation showing your salary increased immediately upon promotion. A pause. Dad, I don't know where Mom got that information, but it's not accurate. Quote. Margaret opened her laptop and pulled up the human resources document she'd found through her old university connections. Robert, I have your actual employment contract. The salary increase was effective immediately, along with a $15,000 signing bonus. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. How did you get my employment contract? Robert's voice had lost its casual tone. I have friends in finance, Robert. More importantly, why didn't you tell us about the signing bonus when you called last month asking for help with Emma's summer camp fees? Because it's complicated, Mom. Explain it to me. Harold watched his wife with growing amazement. This wasn't the accommodating woman who usually smoothed over family conflicts. This was someone he'd never seen before. Direct, uncompromising, demanding accountability. Robert, Margaret continued, in the past year, I've supplemented your mortgage payments by $24,000. I've paid for Emma's dance classes, Sophia's art supplies, your car repairs, and 3 different emergency expenses that you claimed couldn't wait. All while you were earning a 6-figure salary and received a $15,000 bonus. Mom, you're making this sound much worse than it is. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like theft. Theft? Robert's voice shot up an octave. Mom, how can you say that? I'm your son. Exactly. You're my son, and you've been systematically lying to me for money. What would you call it? Harold cleared his throat. Robert, I want you to explain to your mother and me why you thought this was acceptable behavior. Dad, everyone in our family helps each other out. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. No, Margaret said firmly. What we've always done is I give money to everyone who asks, regardless of whether they actually need it, while everyone else takes whatever they want, without question or gratitude. That's not fair, Mom. Isn't it? Robert, when was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked how I was doing, what I was thinking about, what I needed? I ask about you all the time. You ask if I'm available to solve your problems. There's a difference. Margaret could hear Robert breathing heavily through the phone. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of desperation she'd never heard before. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. Yes, I make good money now. Yes, I got a bonus. But do you know what it's like being Robert Thompson in this town? Everyone knows Dad was hugely successful. Everyone expects me to live up to that standard. The mortgage on the house. the private schools for the girls, the country club membership. It all costs money, Mom. Real money. So you keep up appearances by stealing from your mother? Harold's voice was ice cold. I'm not stealing. I'm maintaining the family standard. Dad, you understand. You know what it's like to have expectations. Robert, Harold said slowly, I built my business from nothing. I worked 16-hour days for 20 years. I earned everything I have. What you're describing isn't maintaining standards. It's living beyond your means while making your mother subsidize your lifestyle. But Mom has the money. It's not like she needs it for anything. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Margaret felt Harold's hand find hers across the table, his grip tight with suppressed anger. I don't need it for anything? Margaret's voice was dangerously quiet. I mean, you and Dad are set for retirement. You don't have big expenses. What's wrong with helping your family when you can afford it? What's wrong, Robert, is that you decided what I need without ever asking me. What's wrong is that you've been taking money under false pretenses. What's wrong is that you think my role in this family is to be a silent ATM machine. Mom, that's not. Do you know what I wanted to do with some of that money, Robert? I wanted to travel. I've never been to Europe. I've never seen the art museums in Paris that I've dreamed about since college. I wanted to take cooking classes in Italy, learn photography, maybe audit some finance courses at Northwestern to stay current with market trends. Harold was staring at her. You never told me you wanted to do those things. Harold, you never asked. None of you ever asked. Robert's voice came through the speaker, smaller now. Mom, you can still do those things. Can I? Robert, do you know how much money I've given to this family in the past 5 years? $847,000. Nearly $1 million that could have funded multiple trips, courses, experiences, investments in my own future. Instead, it funded your fake emergencies and everyone else's lies. The silence on the phone was absolute. Robert, Margaret continued, I'm 68 years old. I don't have unlimited time to pursue the dreams I deferred while raising you and supporting your father's career. Every dollar I give you for unnecessary expenses is money I'll never get to spend on myself. I didn't think about it that way. Of course you didn't. Because you've never had to think about me as a person with her own wants and needs and dreams. To you, I'm just Mom, the person who fixes things and pays for things and asks nothing in return. Harold squeezed Margaret's hand. Robert, your mother is right. We've all taken her for granted, but what you've been doing goes beyond that. You've been committing fraud. Dad, please don't make this sound criminal. What would you call it if a stranger took money from your mother under false pretenses? Another long silence. Robert, Margaret said, I love you. I'm proud of many things you've accomplished. But this behavior stops now, today. What does that mean? It means no more financial support until you pay back what you took under false pretenses. It means you figure out how to live within your actual means. And it means you start treating me like your mother instead of your personal bank. Mom, you can't be serious. Emma's senior year is coming up. The college applications alone will cost thousands. Then you'll budget for them like every other parent in America. But we're not like every other family. We have money. I have money, Robert. Money I earned through 40 years of careful financial management. Money that belongs to me, not to you or your children. Margaret could hear Robert's breathing becoming more agitated. So what, you're just cutting us all off, after everything we've been to each other as a family? What have we been to each other, Robert? Really think about it. When did you last spend time with me that didn't involve asking for money? When did you last remember my birthday without being reminded? When did you last ask for my advice about anything other than whether I'd pay for something? That's not the only reason I call you. Isn't it? Check your phone records, Robert. Look at our call history. Every single conversation in the past 2 years has included a financial request. Harold was nodding grimly. Your mother is right, son. I've been just as guilty, but what you kids have been doing is worse because it's deliberate deception. Fine! Robert's voice cracked with frustration. Fine. Maybe I haven't been completely honest about everything. But Mom, you never said no. You never questioned anything. How was I supposed to know you weren't okay with it? Margaret felt a flash of her old guilt, the automatic impulse to apologize, to take responsibility for everyone else's behavior. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by a clarity she hadn't experienced in decades. Robert, are you seriously arguing that because I was too trusting, it's my fault that you lied to me? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I'm saying that families help each other. That's what love looks like. No, Robert, love looks like honesty. Love looks like consideration for the other person's needs and feelings. Love looks like gratitude and reciprocity. What you've been doing isn't love, it's exploitation. The phone was quiet except for Robert's labored breathing. Son, Harold said, your mother has been more generous to this family than anyone had a right to expect. She deserves better from all of us. So what happens now? Robert asked. Margaret looked at Harold, who nodded encouragingly. Now you learn to manage your own finances. You scale back your lifestyle to match your actual income. You pay for your daughter's expenses yourself, like the successful man you actually are. And if there's a real emergency, then you'll call and tell us the truth about it. Provide documentation and we'll discuss it like adults. But Robert, if I find out you've lied to me again about anything at all, I'll cut off all contact until you get professional help for whatever psychological issues make you think it's acceptable to steal from your mother. Mom, I'm serious, Robert. I love you, but I won't enable this behavior anymore. After Robert hung up, Margaret and Harold sat in their kitchen, processing what had just happened. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and the stack of financial documents spread across their counter. 2 down, 3 to go, Margaret said. Harold shook his head in amazement. I can't believe they all. I knew they asked for help frequently, but I had no idea about the deception. Harold, can I ask you something? Of course. When did you stop seeing me as your partner? Harold was quiet for a long moment. I don't know that I consciously stopped. I think success makes me lazy. Made me take you for granted. When the business was struggling in the early years, I needed your advice, valued your input. But as things got easier, I started making decisions on my own and expecting you to just handle the details. Like the boat. Harold looked ashamed. Margaret, I'm sorry. Not just about the anniversary, or the boat, or not consulting you. I'm sorry for letting you become invisible in your own life. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. Relief that Harold was finally seeing what had happened to them, what they'd lost. Harold, do you want to find our way back to being partners? More than anything. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom, emergency call needed ASAP. Studio situation crisis. Call me. Margaret showed the message to Harold, who rolled his eyes. Crisis? What do you want to bet it's another rent situation? No bet. But, Harold, I want you to listen to this call. I want you to hear how they all operate. She dialed Michael's number and put it on speaker. Mom, thank God. Okay, so here's what happened. The studio owner is selling the building, and all the artists have to be out by the end of the month. But here's the thing. There's an amazing space available in the Pearl District, perfect for my work. But I need the first month, last month, and a security deposit by Friday, or they'll give it to someone else. How much, Michael? $12,000 total. I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, this could be the opportunity that changes everything for me. The Pearl District is where all the serious galleries scout for new artists. Margaret looked at Harold, who was shaking his head in disbelief. Michael, didn't you sell a sculpture for $15,000 3 weeks ago? A pause. Who told you about that? It's on your website, Michael, along with several other pieces you've sold recently. Mom, that money is already allocated for supplies and equipment. What supplies and equipment cost $15,000? It's complicated. There are bronze casting fees, and I need new tools and... Michael, Harold interrupted. This is your father. Your mother and I have been reviewing the family's financial situation. We know you've been lying about your income and expenses. Dad, you're both. This feels like an ambush. It's called accountability, Margaret said. Something that's been missing from our family for far too long. Quote, the conversation with Michael followed the same pattern. Initial deception, defensive justifications, eventual admission of lies, followed by attempts to manipulate them emotionally. By the end, Margaret had cut off his financial support, and Harold had made it clear that the days of easy money were over. As the sun set over Winnetka, Margaret realized she felt lighter than she had in years. The confrontations had been difficult, but each one had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. "Harold," she said, "I think we need to cancel our dinner reservation for Saturday." "Why?" "Because we need to have this conversation with Jessica and the grandchildren in person. All of them. Together. No more individual manipulations. No more playing us against each other." Harold nodded slowly. "A family meeting. The first honest family meeting we've had in decades." As they began planning for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversation of their family's history, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years: excitement about her own future. For the first time in decades, she was going to find out who Margaret Thompson really was, when she wasn't busy being everything to everyone else. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at Margaret and Harold's house. What no one except Margaret and Harold knew was that Charles Brennan, their financial advisor, would also be attending, along with Margaret's longtime friend and attorney, Susan Walsh. Margaret had spent the week preparing with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a case. Financial records, bank statements, employment documents, social media screenshots and correspondence were organized in individual folders for each family member. She had also made some calls that would surprise everyone. Jessica arrived first, looking nervous and contrite. She wore a conservative dress and carried flowers, white roses, which would have been touching if Margaret hadn't known they were Harold's favorites, not hers. Jessica had clearly done some research on damage control. "Grandma, I've been thinking about our conversation all week. I want to apologize." "Save it for the meeting, Jessica. We'll discuss everything when everyone's here." Robert and his family arrived next. Emma and Sophia looked confused and slightly resentful at being dragged to what their father had probably described as Grandma's money issues. Robert himself appeared haggard, as if he hadn't been sleeping well. Patricia came in with Marcus, both of them wearing expressions of wounded martyrdom. Patricia had clearly been coaching her son on how to handle the situation, whispering to him in the entryway. Michael was the last to arrive, flying in from Portland, looking disheveled and defensive. He'd been posting dramatic social media updates all week about family betrayal and conditional love, clearly trying to build public sympathy for his position. Margaret had arranged the living room like a boardroom. Harold sat beside her at one end, with Charles and Susan flanking them. The family members took seats around the room, their confusion evident when they noticed the presence of professionals. "Before we begin," Margaret said, "I want everyone to understand that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes." "Legal purposes?" Patricia's voice was sharp with alarm. "Charles and Susan will explain why that's necessary." Margaret nodded to her attorney. Susan Walsh opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here because Margaret has asked me to review the family's financial arrangements and ensure that certain legal protections are in place going forward." "Legal protections?" Robert's face had gone pale. Charles spread out his financial analysis on the coffee table. "What we've discovered is a pattern of financial misrepresentation that has resulted in Margaret transferring nearly $1 million to family members under false pretenses." The room erupted in protests and denials, but Margaret held up her hand for silence. "You'll each have a chance to speak, but first you're going to listen." She opened the first folder. "Jessica, you received the Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell Scholarship on May 15th. Full tuition, fees, and living expenses for 2 years, $180,000 in value. Since then, you've requested and received $8,400 from me for various school expenses that are actually covered by your scholarship." Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but Margaret continued. "More importantly, you never told me about the scholarship because you wanted to keep receiving money from me. That's fraud, Jessica." "Grandma, I can explain." "You'll have your turn." Margaret opened the second folder. "Robert, your promotion to senior sales director came with an immediate salary increase to $145,000 annually, plus a $15,000 signing bonus. Yet you've continued to request mortgage assistance, claiming financial hardship. In the past year, I've supplemented your income by $31,000. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, that promotion came with increased expenses. Expenses you chose to take on without consulting anyone. Expenses that are your responsibility, not mine. Margaret turned to Patricia. Patricia, your divorce settlement was finalized 8 months ago. You received $180,000 in assets, plus monthly alimony of $3,200. Your Instagram posts show luxury purchases totaling over $25,000 in the past 6 months, while you've requested and received $33,000 from me for necessities. Patricia's face flushed red. Those posts are misleading. Are they? Because I have your credit card statements. Margaret produced a thick stack of papers. Hermes, Louis Vuitton, expensive restaurants, spa weekends, all while crying poverty to your mother. Michael looked increasingly panicked as Margaret opened his folder. Michael, your art sales in the past year total $47,000. You've also received a $12,000 grant from the Oregon Arts Council that you never mentioned. Yet you've requested $28,000 from me for rent and supplies. Mom, the art world is complicated. Sales don't mean immediate cash. They do when you're paid up front, which you were. Margaret placed bank deposit slips on the table. I have records of every transaction. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Margaret looked around at her family, her successful, lying, manipulative family. Now, she said, you're going to explain to me why you thought it was acceptable to steal from me. We didn't steal, Patricia protested. This is family money. No, Patricia, this is my money. Money I earned through 40 years of careful financial management. Money I chose to share with you because I thought you needed help. Money you took under false pretenses. Emma, Robert's daughter, raised her hand tentatively. Grandma, I don't understand. Are you saying we can't come to you for help anymore? Margaret's expression softened slightly. Emma, you and Sophia are different. You're still in high school, still dependents, but your father has been lying about his ability to pay for your expenses. She turned back to Robert. Your daughter's college funds are fully funded. $200,000 each. More than enough for 4 years at excellent universities. But you've been making them think they need to worry about college costs while requesting additional money from me. Sophia spoke up, her voice confused. Dad, you told us Grandma needed to help with college because you couldn't afford it. Robert couldn't see his daughter's eyes. It's complicated, sweetheart. No, it's not, Harold said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Your father lied to manipulate me and your grandmother into giving him money he didn't need. Charles cleared his throat. There's another issue we need to address. The pattern of deception isn't just about past money. It's created a situation where Margaret's future financial security could be at risk. He displayed a projection chart. At current rates of family support, combined with Harold's recent large purchases, this household will face serious financial constraints within 5 years. Margaret could find herself unable to afford the retirement she's earned. Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden she'd tended for decades. Do you know what I've sacrificed for this family? I turned down a career on Wall Street. I gave up professional opportunities that could have made me one of the most successful women in finance. I poured my expertise into building Harold's business instead of my own legacy. She turned back to face them. I raised 3 children, managed households, supported Harold's career, and later provided financial support for all of you. I never complained, never asked for recognition, never demanded that my own dreams be prioritized. Her voice grew stronger. But somewhere along the way you all forgot that I'm a person. You started seeing me as a resource to be exploited rather than a mother and grandmother who deserves honesty and respect. Jessica was crying. Grandma, we love you. Do you, Jessica? Because love isn't taking advantage of someone's generosity. Love isn't lying to get money. Love isn't forgetting someone's anniversary for 5 straight years. Harold stood and joined Margaret by the window. Your mother has been the foundation of this family for 42 years. She's been taken for granted by all of us. But what you kids have been doing goes beyond that. You've been committing fraud against someone who loved you unconditionally. Patricia stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We're family. Families help each other. Families don't lie to each other, Margaret replied calmly. Everyone stretches the truth sometimes. Stretches the truth? Susan Walsh spoke up. Patricia, you've taken over $30,000 from your mother in the past year under false pretenses. In any other context, that would be criminal fraud. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And if this pattern continues, Margaret would have grounds for criminal charges against all of you. The room fell deadly silent. Robert found his voice first. Mom, you wouldn't press charges against your own children. Margaret sat back down, her expression unreadable. Robert, a week ago I wouldn't have believed my own children were capable of systematically lying to me and stealing money. So I guess we're all learning things about each other. Michael laughed bitterly. This is insane. You're treating us like criminals because we asked our mother for help. You didn't ask for help, Michael. You lied about your circumstances and manipulated me emotionally to get money you didn't need. Fine, maybe I exaggerated some things. But Mom, you have millions of dollars. What's a few thousand here and there? Margaret felt her last reservoir of patience drain away. Michael, do you hear yourself? You're justifying theft because I can afford it? It's not theft. Then what is it? Michael struggled for words. It's family support. Based on lies. Based on love. Margaret stood up again, her voice rising for the first time. Love? Michael, do you know when I realized you didn't love me? It was when I understood that you only call me when you need money. Do you know when I realized none of you love me? It was when I counted 5 forgotten anniversaries, 3 forgotten birthdays, and dozens of conversations where you never once asked how I was doing or what I needed. The room was completely quiet now, except for the sound of Jessica's soft crying. You want to know what love looks like? Margaret continued. Love looks like honesty. Love looks like consideration. Love looks like reciprocity. Love looks like remembering that the person you claim to love has feelings and needs and dreams. She walked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. What you've all been giving me isn't love. It's exploitation disguised as family obligation. Harold cleared his throat. Your mother and I have made some decisions. Quote, Charles opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal documents. First, all financial support is suspended immediately until certain conditions are met. What conditions? Robert asked. Susan answered. Full financial disclosure from each of you, complete honesty about your circumstances, and repayment of funds taken under false pretenses. Repayment? Patricia's voice was shrill. You want us to pay back the money you gave us willingly? Money you obtained through fraud, Susan corrected. Margaret sat back down beside Harold, who took her hand. There's something else. Harold and I are taking a year-long trip to Europe. We leave next month. The family stared at them in shock. Europe? Jessica whispered. I'm 68 years old, and I've never seen Paris. I've never visited the museums I've dreamed about since college. Harold and I are going to rediscover who we are as partners, away from all of you. Patricia stood up abruptly. You're abandoning us? No, Patricia. We're living our own lives for the first time in decades. What about emergencies? What if someone really needs help? Harold answered. Then you'll handle it like adults, like every other family in America handles their problems. Marcus, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Grandma, what about my college expenses? I'm supposed to start junior year next month. Margaret looked at her grandson with genuine sadness. Marcus, your college fund has enough money to finish your degree. But your mother has been taking money from me while claiming she couldn't afford your expenses. You need to ask her why she's been lying. Marcus turned to Patricia with confusion and hurt in his eyes. Mom? Patricia's face crumpled. I thought if I asked for help, it meant I was still important to the family. Patricia, Harold said gently, you're important because you're our daughter, not because you need money. The meeting ended with legal documents being signed, bank accounts being restructured, and a family finally forced to confront the toxic dynamics they'd created. Some cried, some argued, some sat in stunned silence. As the family members filed out, each processing the reality that their free ride was over, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. Tomorrow, she will start planning the European trip she'd dreamed about for 40 years. She would rediscover who Margaret Thompson was when she wasn't busy being everyone else's solution. And for the first time in her adult life, she would find out what it felt like to put her own dreams first. 6 months later, Margaret stood on the balcony of a small apartment overlooking the Seine River in Paris, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose. Harold was still sleeping. They'd stayed up late, wandering through the Latin Quarter, talking about everything and nothing, the way they used to when they were young. Her phone sat silent on the bedside table inside. No frantic calls about emergencies. No text messages demanding immediate attention. No one expects her to solve their problems or fund their dreams. For the first time in decades, Margaret's mornings belonged to her. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first month after the family meeting had been brutal. Patricia had shown up at the house twice, alternating between tears and rage, demanding to know how Margaret could abandon her family. Robert had sent increasingly desperate emails, as he struggled to adjust his lifestyle to his actual income. Michael had posted vindictive social media rants about heartless parents. But Harold had surprised her. The man who had once dismissed her concerns was now her strongest supporter. He'd stood firm when Robert tried to manipulate him during golf games. He'd refused to take Patricia's calls when she attempted to go around Margaret. Most importantly, he'd started seeing Margaret as his partner again, instead of his household manager. "The kids will adjust," he'd said during one of their planning sessions for Europe. "They're all capable adults. We raised them to be independent. We just forgot to let them actually be independent." The European trip had started as an escape, but had become something much more profound, a rediscovery. In Rome, Margaret had taken art history courses at a local university, her rusty Italian improving daily as she engaged with concepts she'd only read about in books. In London, she'd attended financial seminars, her sharp mind quickly catching up with decades of market evolution she'd missed while managing family drama. Harold had been a revelation too. Away from the expectations and routines of home, he'd remembered how to be curious about his wife's thoughts, dreams, and opinions. They'd spent hours in Tuscan vineyards discussing philosophy, politics, and their shared future, in ways they hadn't since their 20s. "I forgot how brilliant you are," he told her one evening in Florence. "I'm sorry it took me so long to remember." Margaret's phone buzzed with a message from Charles Brennan, their financial advisor back home. The quarterly report showed something remarkable. Without the constant drain of family financial requests, their net worth had actually grown significantly. Margaret's careful investment strategies, freed from the burden of subsidizing adult children's lifestyles, were performing exactly as she'd expected they would. More satisfying than the numbers, though, were the relationships that had emerged from the ashes of the old dysfunction. Emma and Sophia, Robert's daughters, had reached out directly to Margaret during their senior year of high school. Not for money, but for genuine advice about college choices and career paths. "Grandma," Emma had written in an email, "I'm sorry about everything that happened. I didn't know Dad was lying about money. I just wanted to say that I love you and I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Can we video chat sometime? I want to hear about your trip and ask for your advice about my business major." Jessica had been the first to break. 3 months after the family meeting, she'd called to confess that she'd been talking to a therapist about family dynamics and money. "Grandma, I realize I was taught to see you as a resource instead of a person. That's not your fault. That's something I need to fix about myself." The scholarship she'd initially been hesitant to accept had led to research opportunities and academic recognition. Her last letter to Margaret had been filled with genuine excitement about her studies and gratitude for the foundation Margaret had provided through years of educational support. "I understand now," Jessica had written, "that the best way to honor your investment in my education is to succeed on my own merits, not to keep asking for more." Robert had been slower to adjust, but the wake-up call had ultimately been good for him. Forced to live within his actual means, he'd discovered he was quite capable of managing his finances effectively. His marriage had improved as he and his wife learned to work together on household budgeting, instead of relying on Margaret as a safety net. Patricia remained the holdout. She'd made several attempts to reconcile, but each conversation revealed that she still didn't understand the fundamental issue. Her apologies focused on miscommunication rather than dishonesty, and her requests for renewed contact always seemed to circle back to hints about financial difficulties. "She'll come around or she won't," Harold had said during one of their walks along the Thames, "but that's her choice to make. We can't force someone to grow up." Michael had surprised everyone by thriving without Margaret's financial support. The pressure of actual financial necessity had focused his artistic efforts, leading to his first major gallery showing in Portland. His art had always been technically proficient, but the emotional depth that came from genuine struggle had transformed it into something truly compelling. He'd called Margaret from the gallery opening, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I know I was terrible to you, but being forced to make it on my own taught me something important. Success I earn myself feels completely different from success that's handed to me." Margaret looked at her watch. Almost time for her morning walk along the Seine before her afternoon lecture at the Sorbonne. She was auditing courses in international finance, her mind delighting in concepts and theories she'd never had time to explore while managing everyone else's lives. Harold emerged from the bedroom, already dressed for his morning run. At 71, he was in the best shape he'd been in years, the stress of maintaining appearances and managing family drama having lifted from his shoulders. "Coffee smells good," he said, kissing her cheek. "What's the plan for today?" "Lecture this afternoon, museum this evening. And you?" "Architecture tour with that group of retired engineers I met. Then I thought we could try that little bistro near Notre Dame for dinner." Margaret smiled. "Sounds perfect." This was what she'd discovered in Europe. Life could be simple when you weren't constantly managing other people's crises. Relationships could be peaceful when built on mutual respect, rather than financial dependence. Days could be fulfilling when filled with your own interests rather than everyone else's emergencies. Her phone rang, an international call from Charles back in Chicago. "Margaret, I wanted to update you on something interesting. Robert called asking about setting up college funds for his daughters using his own money. He wanted my advice on investment strategies." Margaret felt a warm surge of pride. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd be happy to help, but that he should ask his mother for advice, since she's one of the most talented financial strategists I've ever worked with." "And?" "He said he was planning to call you later today, not for money but for actual advice. He said he finally understands the difference." After hanging up, Margaret stood on the balcony for a few more minutes, watching Paris come alive below her. Street vendors setting up their stalls, cafe owners arranging sidewalk tables, students hurrying to morning classes with backpacks and determined expressions. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, invisible in her own life, valued only for her ability to solve problems and provide money, forgotten on her anniversary and taken for granted every other day of the year. That woman had been afraid to assert her own needs, afraid to disappoint others, afraid to discover what might happen if she stopped being indispensable. This woman, the one sipping coffee in Paris, studying at university, planning museum visits and intimate dinners with her rediscovered husband, this woman had learned something revolutionary. The people who truly loved her would still love her when she stopped enabling their dysfunction. And the people who only valued her as a resource, well, she was better off without them. Harold returned from his run, energized and happy. "Ready for our last week in Paris?" "Ready for whatever comes next," Margaret replied. They were planning to spend another 6 months traveling through Scandinavia before eventually returning to Chicago. But the house they'd return to would be different. Redecorated to reflect both their tastes. Set up for entertaining friends rather than just managing family drama. Equipped with a home office where Margaret could continue the financial consulting work she'd decided to pursue. At 68, Margaret Thompson was finally living her own life. And it was, she discovered, absolutely beautiful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Grandma, I got into Northwestern's business program. I'd love to get your advice about my course selection when you have time. No rush. I know you're living your best life in Paris. Love you." Margaret smiled and typed back, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'd be honored to help. How about a video call this weekend?" Quote, This was what healthy family relationships looked like: mutual respect, genuine interest in each other's lives, and support offered freely rather than demanded through manipulation. Margaret had spent 42 years learning to be the perfect wife, mother, and grandmother. Now she was finally learning to be herself. And herself, it turned out, was more than enough. The ripple effects of Margaret's transformation extended far beyond her immediate family. Word had spread through their social circle in Winnetka about the situation with the Thompson family. Some friends had been shocked. Others secretly admired Margaret's courage. And a few had confided their own struggles with adult children who seemed incapable of financial independence. Margaret's friend Eleanor Mitchell had called during their second month in Europe. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but what you did has inspired me to have some difficult conversations with my own children. My daughter Susan is 35 and still asking me to pay her credit card bills every month. I never realized I was enabling her until I watched what happened with your family." The conversation had led to Margaret starting an informal support group for what she'd begun calling financial enablers, parents and grandparents who had lost themselves in the process of constantly rescuing their adult children. Through video calls from various European cities, Margaret had been counseling other families through similar interventions. Dr. Amanda Cross, a family therapist from Northwestern, had reached out after hearing about Margaret's story through professional networks. "Mrs. Thompson, what you've described is a textbook case of financial codependency. Would you be interested in speaking at our annual family therapy conference? Your story could help a lot of families recognize these patterns before they become as entrenched as yours had become." Margaret had accepted the invitation, scheduled for after their return to Chicago. The idea of turning her painful experience into something that could help others felt like a natural evolution of her journey. The academic courses in Paris had reawakened Margaret's intellectual curiosity in ways she hadn't anticipated. Professor Laurent Dubois, who taught her international finance seminar, had encouraged her to consider pursuing a PhD. Quote, "Mrs. Thompson, your insights on family financial dynamics combined with your practical experience could contribute significantly to our understanding of intergenerational wealth transfer patterns." At 68, the idea of returning to school seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. Margaret had always wondered what her career might have looked like if she'd stayed on the academic track. Perhaps it wasn't too late to find out. Harold had been enthusiastically supportive when she'd mentioned the professor's suggestion. "Maggie, do you remember when we first met and you told me about your research on emerging markets? I was so intimidated by how brilliant you were. I'd love to see you pursue that again." The nickname Maggie had emerged during their European travels, a throwback to their early relationship before she'd become the formal Margaret who managed household logistics. Harold using it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd forgotten existed. Their relationship transformation had been the most surprising aspect of the entire experience. Margaret had expected to feel lonely in her new boundaries with the children, but instead she'd discovered that her marriage could be fulfilling when both partners were fully present. "I think I was hiding behind the kids' chaos," Harold had admitted during a long conversation in a Vienna coffeehouse. "It was easier to focus on their emergencies than to do the work of reconnecting with you as equals." They'd started taking cooking classes together in each city they visited, learning to prepare meals as partners, rather than Margaret automatically taking charge of all domestic responsibilities. Harold had discovered he enjoyed cooking, and Margaret had realized she'd been so focused on everyone else's preferences that she'd forgotten what foods she actually enjoyed. The financial independence Margaret had claimed for herself had unexpected psychological benefits. Knowing that her money was truly hers to spend or save created a sense of security she'd never experienced, even during their wealthiest years. Every euro she spent on herself, the art books, the museum memberships, the university courses, felt like an investment in a person who mattered rather than money begrudgingly spent on necessities. Margaret's transformation had even affected her relationship with money itself. She'd started a personal investment portfolio separate from their joint accounts, making financial decisions based purely on her own goals and timeline. For the first time in her life, she was building wealth for herself, rather than for other people to eventually spend. The quarterly statements from Charles showed remarkable growth in their overall financial position. Without the constant drain of family requests, their investments were compounding exactly as Margaret's projections had predicted. More importantly, Margaret was finally able to see the long-term results of her financial expertise without it being immediately redistributed to adult children's lifestyle choices. "Your mother is a financial genius," Charles had told Harold during one of their check-in calls. "Without the family expenses, she's on track to double your net worth within 5 years. She's been making investment decisions at a level that would impress any Wall Street firm." Margaret had started writing about their experience, beginning with a journal that had evolved into what her new literary agent described as a potential best-selling memoir. The working title was The Grandmother Who Forgot to Pay, a story of financial boundaries and family recovery. Several publishers had expressed interest after reading the initial chapters. Margaret's story resonated with a generation of baby boomers who found themselves financially supporting adult children while neglecting their own retirement needs and personal fulfillment. The writing process had been therapeutic in unexpected ways. Documenting the gradual erosion of her identity, followed by its deliberate reconstruction, had helped Margaret understand patterns she might otherwise have continued to repeat. She'd realized that her need to be needed had been just as destructive as her family's willingness to exploit that need. During their time in Copenhagen, Margaret had connected with a group of international women who had made significant life changes after age 60. The Late Bloomers Society, as they called themselves, included a woman who had started medical school at 72, another who had launched a tech startup at 65, and a former housewife who had become a documentary filmmaker at 69. "Age is just numbers when you finally start living authentically," Dr. Ingrid Larson, the medical student, had told Margaret during one of their walking tours through the city. "I spent 40 years raising children and supporting my husband's career. When I finally asked myself what I wanted to do with my life, medicine was the answer. My children thought I was crazy, but they've adjusted." These relationships had shown Margaret that her story wasn't unique. Many women had lost themselves in service to others and found liberation in setting boundaries. The difference was that Margaret had the financial resources to make dramatic changes, which carried both privileges and responsibilities. The responsibility aspect had weighed on Margaret's mind throughout their travels. She was aware that not every woman in her situation could afford to travel Europe for a year or pursue academic interests without worrying about income. Her privilege came with an obligation to use her experience to help others, which is why she'd committed to speaking engagements and was considering the PhD program. As their European adventure neared its end, Margaret and Harold had spent considerable time planning their return to Chicago. The house would be extensively renovated to reflect both their personalities rather than just Harold's preferences. Margaret's home office would be designed for serious financial work and writing. The guest rooms would be available for friends and chosen family rather than automatically reserved for adult children who might need emergency housing. Most significantly, they'd established a new family foundation focused on educational opportunities for genuinely disadvantaged young people. Instead of subsidizing their own grandchildren's already privileged lifestyles, Margaret wanted to provide scholarships for students who actually needed financial support to pursue their dreams. "It feels good to help people who appreciate the opportunity rather than expect it," Margaret had explained to Harold while they toured potential scholarship recipients' schools in rural France. The foundation work had given Margaret a renewed sense of purpose that felt healthier than her previous role as family financial enabler. These scholarship recipients sent genuine thank you letters, shared their academic progress without being asked, and treated the financial support as the gift it was rather than an entitlement. Margaret's phone had remained remarkably quiet throughout their travels, a stark contrast to the constant emergency calls that had defined her life in Chicago. When family members did contact her, the conversations were increasingly healthy. Updates on achievements, requests for advice rather than money, and genuine expressions of interest in her experiences. The silence from Patricia remained concerning, but not surprising. Margaret had learned through Harold's conversations with Robert that Patricia was struggling to adjust to life without financial backup. She'd been forced to downsize her living situation and had taken a full-time job for the first time since her divorce. Patricia's angry, Robert had reported, but she's also becoming more independent. Maybe this was what she needed, even if she doesn't see it that way yet. Margaret felt sadness about Patricia's continued resistance to their new family dynamics, but she no longer felt guilt. Patricia was a capable adult who would find her way forward when she stopped waiting for rescue. The grandchildren had become the brightest spot in Margaret's new family relationships. Without the filter of their parents' financial desperation, Margaret was getting to know them as individuals with their own thoughts, dreams, and personalities. Marcus had started calling her regularly from UCLA, not for money, but for life advice. Their conversations covered everything from career choices to relationship decisions to philosophical questions about purpose and meaning. "Grandma, you're the wisest person I know," he'd told her during their last call. "I want to be as brave as you when I'm older." Emma and Sophia had started planning a summer trip to visit Margaret and Harold in Chicago, funded entirely by their own savings from part-time jobs. "We want to take you guys out to dinner," Emma had written in her email, "to thank you for everything and to show you we can take care of ourselves." Jessica had been accepted into a prestigious medical residency program and had written Margaret a long letter about her career goals and her gratitude for the educational foundation Margaret had provided. "I realize now that the best way to honor your investment in my future is to succeed on my own merit and to help other people the way you helped me." As Margaret packed for their return to Chicago, she reflected on the person she'd become during their year away. The woman who had left Chicago had been invisible in her own life, valued only for her ability to solve problems and provide money. The woman preparing to return was confident, purposeful, and excited about her future. She had rediscovered her intellectual capabilities, rekindled her marriage, established healthier family relationships, and found new ways to contribute to the world. Most importantly, she had learned that it was never too late to start living authentically. Margaret Thompson was finally home, not in a geographic sense, but in the deeper sense of being comfortable in her own skin and excited about her own future. At 68, her life was just beginning. The flight back to Chicago felt different from their departure a year earlier. Then, Margaret had been fleeing a life that had become unbearable. Now, she was returning as someone who had consciously chosen her future, rather than simply accepting what others expected of her. The renovated house awaited them, transformed according to specifications Margaret had sent from Europe. Gone was Harold's oppressive dark wood paneling, replaced with bright, airy spaces that reflected both their personalities. Margaret's new office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking her redesigned garden, custom-built shelves for her expanding collection of financial and academic texts, and a state-of-the-art computer system for her consulting work. The first surprise came within hours of their arrival. Emma and Sophia were waiting in the driveway with a welcome home banner they'd painted themselves. But more meaningful than the banner was what they'd organized. A neighborhood potluck featuring all of Margaret and Harold's friends, celebrating their return not as the couple who'd fled family drama, but as adventurers who'd chosen to prioritize their own dreams. "Mrs. Thompson," said Janet Walsh from next door, "you've inspired half the women in this neighborhood. We've started our own book club focused on late-life reinvention. Would you consider leading a discussion about your European experiences?" The book club invitation led to others. The Winnetka Community Center asked Margaret to teach a financial literacy course for women over 50. Northwestern University's continuing education program requested her input on developing curricula for non-traditional older students. The Chicago Tribune wanted to interview her about her memoir in progress. Margaret realized that her personal transformation had inadvertently positioned her as a spokesperson for women reclaiming their lives after decades of self-sacrifice. The responsibility felt both daunting and energizing. Her first consulting client proved that her professional instincts remained sharp. David Chen, a successful surgeon, had contacted her through Charles's referral network. His family financial situation mirrored Margaret's former predicament: 3 adult children who had learned to treat their father as an unlimited funding source while pursuing increasingly expensive lifestyles. "Dr. Chen," Margaret said during their initial consultation, "your daughter's art history PhD at Harvard is admirable, but asking you to fund her apartment in Paris while she writes her dissertation crosses the line from educational support to lifestyle subsidization." Working with Dr. Chen and his family over several months, Margaret developed a systematic approach to family financial boundaries that other professionals began requesting. She called it the Sustainable Family Finance Model, a framework that distinguished between genuine support and enabling dysfunction. The model attracted attention from family therapists, financial planners, and estate attorneys. Margaret found herself speaking at professional conferences, her presentations drawing standing ovations from audiences who recognized the widespread nature of intergenerational financial dysfunction. Her academic pursuits gained momentum as well. Professor Dubois had arranged for Margaret to present her research on family financial codependency at the Sorbonne's annual economics symposium via video conference. The presentation led to invitations from universities across Europe and North America. Northwestern University's PhD program in behavioral economics had officially accepted Margaret's application. At 69, she would be among their oldest doctoral candidates, but her unique combination of practical experience and analytical skills made her an attractive research prospect. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Sarah Martinez, the program director, had said during Margaret's interview, "Your lived experience with financial family dynamics, combined with your early academic credentials, positions you to contribute significantly to our understanding of intergenerational wealth psychology." The dissertation research Margaret planned would examine the psychological mechanisms that enable financially capable adults to manipulate elderly family members for monetary support. Her own family's transformation would serve as a longitudinal case study, with their consent. Surprisingly, all 3 of her adult children had agreed to participate in the research. Even Patricia, still somewhat estranged, had grudgingly acknowledged that Margaret's work might help other families avoid their mistakes. "If my stupidity can help other people, fine," Patricia had said during their first conversation in months. "But Mom, I want you to know that losing your financial support forced me to grow up in ways I didn't know I needed to." Patricia's growth had been the most dramatic among Margaret's children. Forced to live independently for the first time since her divorce, she'd discovered capabilities she'd forgotten she possessed. Her new job at a marketing firm had led to a promotion within 6 months. She'd developed genuine friendships with colleagues who knew nothing about her family's wealth. "I realized I'd been defining myself as a victim," Patricia had explained during her reluctant interview for Margaret's research. "Having you as a safety net meant I never had to learn to trust myself." Robert's transformation had been more gradual but equally significant. His marriage had strengthened as he and his wife learned to work together on financial decisions, instead of relying on Margaret's interventions. His daughters respected him more now that they saw him taking responsibility for family expenses. "Dad's different," Emma had confided to Margaret during one of their regular phone calls. "He actually talks to us about budgeting and planning instead of just saying Grandma will handle it whenever money questions come up." Robert had started his own small investment fund, applying principles he'd learned from observing Margaret's strategies over the years. His success had given him confidence he'd never possessed when he was financially dependent on his parents. Michael's artistic career had flourished in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. The pressure of genuine financial necessity had focused his creative energy and forced him to develop business skills he'd previously ignored. His sculptures were now represented by galleries in 3 cities, and he'd started teaching art workshops to supplement his income. "Mom, I never thanked you properly for cutting me off," Michael had said during his research interview. "I thought you were being cruel, but you were actually giving me the gift of proving to myself that I could succeed independently." The grandchildren had become Margaret's greatest source of pride. Without the dysfunction of their parents' financial manipulation, they were developing healthy relationships with money and family responsibility. Jessica's medical residency was going exceptionally well. She'd started a support group for medical students from wealthy families, helping them navigate the psychological challenges of earning their success rather than having it funded. Her research on family financial dynamics in medical education had been published in several professional journals. Marcus had changed his major from film to business, inspired by watching Margaret's consulting work. "Grandma, I want to help families the way you do," he'd explained. "I want to understand how money affects relationships and help people find balance." The twins, Emma and Sophia, had started a small business creating custom artwork for local businesses. Their entrepreneurial spirit impressed Margaret, particularly because they'd never asked her for startup funding. "We wanted to prove we could do this ourselves," Emma had explained. "You taught us that success means more when you earn it." Margaret's memoir had found a publisher, with the book scheduled for release the following spring. The advance had been substantial enough to fund several more scholarship recipients through her foundation. More importantly, the writing process had helped Margaret articulate lessons that could benefit other families struggling with similar dynamics. Early readers of the manuscript had reported profound impacts on their own family relationships. One woman had written to Margaret, "Your book helped me realize I wasn't helping my adult son. I was preventing him from learning to help himself. It's been hard, but we're both better for the changes we've made." The foundation work had exceeded Margaret's expectations. The initial scholarship recipients were excelling academically and personally, their gratitude and achievements providing Margaret with more satisfaction than years of funding her own family's desires had ever generated. Samantha Rodriguez, one of the foundation's first recipients, had graduated from community college with honors and transferred to Northwestern on a full academic scholarship. "Mrs. Thompson, your support didn't just pay for my education, it showed me that someone believed in my potential. That belief changed everything for me." Quote. Margaret's calendar had become busier than it had been during her years of family crisis management, but the activities energized rather than drained her. Every commitment related to goals she'd chosen rather than problems she'd been forced to solve. The marriage counseling sessions she and Harold had begun during their European travels had evolved into couples coaching for other long-term marriages struggling with similar dynamics. Their story of rediscovering partnership after decades of parallel but disconnected lives resonated with many couples their age. "Harold and I learned that you can lose yourself in a marriage not just through conflict but through neglect," Margaret had explained to one couple they were mentoring. "We stopped seeing each other as individuals with separate dreams and started operating like a business partnership focused only on family logistics." Harold had embraced his role as Margaret's partner in her new endeavors with enthusiasm that reminded her of their early marriage. He handled scheduling for her speaking engagements, managed logistics for her research projects, and provided emotional support during challenging moments in her academic work. "I'm proud of who you've become," he'd told her recently, "but mostly I'm proud that I got smart enough to stop standing in your way." Their social circle had expanded beyond their traditional Winnetka neighbors to include Margaret's academic colleagues, her consulting clients, and other late-life reinvention success stories. Dinner parties at their house now featured discussions of research methodologies, family psychology, and social impact, rather than just golf scores and grandchildren's achievements. Margaret had started mentoring other women through career transitions after 60. Her informal network of late bloomers had grown to include women pursuing everything from medical degrees to artistic careers to entrepreneurial ventures. The common thread was the courage to prioritize personal fulfillment after decades of self-sacrifice. "Age becomes irrelevant when you're finally living authentically," Margaret had told a newspaper reporter. "I spent 40 years being who everyone else needed me to be. Now I get to discover who I actually am." The discovery process continued daily. Margaret had taken up photography, documenting her research subjects and travels. She'd joined a hiking group, surprising herself with her physical capabilities. She'd started learning Italian in preparation for a research sabbatical in Rome the following year. Most surprisingly, she'd developed a passion for public speaking. The terrified woman who had once avoided attention was now commanding audiences of hundreds, sharing her story with conviction and humor that left listeners both entertained and inspired. "I used to think courage meant never being afraid," Margaret had said during her TED Talk the previous month. "Now I understand that courage means being afraid and choosing growth anyway." Looking back on the woman she'd been just 2 years earlier, invisible, taken for granted, financially exploited by her own family, Margaret could barely recognize herself. That woman had been afraid to assert her needs, afraid to disappoint others, afraid to discover what might happen if she stopped being indispensable. This woman, Drive, Margaret Thompson, as she would soon be known, was afraid of very little. She'd learned that the people worth keeping in her life would love her for who she was, not for what she could provide. She'd discovered that her value wasn't determined by her usefulness to others, but by her own sense of purpose and fulfillment. The woman who had once been forgotten on her anniversary for 5 consecutive years was now surrounded by people who celebrated her achievements, supported her dreams, and valued her wisdom. The transformation had been painful, requiring her to disappoint people she loved and restructure relationships that had defined her identity for decades. But the result was a life she'd never imagined possible, a life where she mattered not as a resource to be exploited, but as a person to be cherished. At 69, Margaret Thompson was finally living her own story, rather than serving as a supporting character in everyone else's drama. And the best part? This was only the beginning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.